Hi, everyone. I think should we give it a couple more minutes, or I can't see any last people joining in at the moment, so
Only a couple coming in the room. I would say we can go ahead and get started.
fab. Well, everyone, welcome to another Secure Asset Transfer Protocol meeting. A few bits to cover today. We're looking forward to cracking on. So I will go through the introductions quite quickly. The standard ones with the note well. I'll leave that slide on screen for a minute or two, or a few seconds. If anyone would like to review these, please just shout and I'll pause for longer. Again, links available as needed. Code of conduct. I think we're all fairly familiar with these. Again, if anyone would like me to recap them, happy to do so. And a reminder that the session is being recorded. And an update of the active drafts to consider. There's still the 3. Lovely. So today, very quick introduction. Claire and Wes, you know us all quite well now. Thomas is going to run through some updates to the core document and the stage 0, which is out of scope, but something that's very much relevant. And then I know a conversation that you're all hoping we will get to sooner rather than later is the next steps. What does that look like for our current drafts and moving forward into a potential recharter? So without further ado, Wes, I'll hand over to you for Thomas.
I'll switch off the. Takes about 5 clicks and various things. I've got to steal the slides back to Claire and then share the next deck. Actually, can you unshare?
There you go.
Oh, you did it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we have to tell the clicker that it gets authorization. There you go.
There you go.
Can you hear Thomas, Claire?
No.
Oh, that mic's not on.
Yes. When in doubt.
There we go. Loud and clear.
So this is just very quick update from the last meeting at the interim meeting. I think the only outstanding part was, yeah, I'm clicking. Oh, is it? Which button do I?
It should be there right now.
Maybe you need to move it.
Let me try it and give it to you.
Try again. Okay.
Try it now. No? Okay. No, I'll do it.
Okay, next slide. So the only outstanding thing was, actually keep on going, was the section on security considerations. We have left that empty so far. And if you go and look at the architecture document, in fact, there's quite a lengthy discussion there. So this is basically a summary of what we added for the core, the security considerations section of core. And if you see, the focus has been on the behavior of the gateways and the gateway operators. We assume the TLS session is there. If somebody's going to like kill the TLS session, well, all bets are off, and so on. And so we point out, and the group has known this for at least over a year, that there are weak points where G1 and G2 could intentionally do something nasty. For example, intentionally drops the commit final, right? So G2 is waiting and waiting and waiting, and G2, remember, has already minted to self, the asset on network 2, and now G2 has to roll back everything. Loss of time, loss of CPU, and if network 2 has fees, that means G2 is the entity that has to pay the fees. Now, in the opposite direction, if G2 decides to drop the acknowledgement of the prepare message, G1 will time out. G1 will probably just terminate the whole thing, and so G1 also wastes resources. Then there's some text about the protection of gateway keys. That's motherhood apple pie. It's like saying, hey, if you have a TLS session, please protect your TLS keys. So that's out of scope. though I think we do cite other working groups such as RATS and Suite to handle some of these issues. The other point was identification of networks. This is also a known weakness, but it's out of scope for the working group right now. For those who are not aware, there is no standard numerical value to identify distributed ledger networks, right? People just use alphanumeric and so on and so on. And we have a draft that's expired with Wagia that we want to like renew probably in the next couple of months. Next slide, please. Simple map of drafts. This is just a quick help menu. So everything we have right now is on the left-hand side: architecture, protocol, core protocol, and the use cases. And this is a quick one-liner summary of all the drafts that's sitting there at the bottom of the working group page. Asset schema and profiles. This is JSON definition. Metadata registries. Where do you put this and these definitions and so on? And how do you manage them? Transfer context is what we call stage 0. How do you set up a transfer context between G1 and G2, and basically between application 1 and application 2? We need to think about API standards, RESTful or otherwise. There is the work on data sharing, data export. That basically, if you have a private asset network, how do you actually report correctly and truthfully about the state of an asset within that network, even though you can't see it? So there's a role for gateways to actually assist in that process. Asset network addresses was the one I was referring to just now, which is the draft with Wagia. And then there was a new implementation guide from Hujian in South Korea, because they have been looking at this problem in the banking sector there. So they want to write some kind of a guide for that. And of course, other ... Okay, next slide, please. End of the slide. Sorry, I forget what slides I have.
No worries. No worries. I had a question. My brain's now dead from running that last session. I apologize. It all looks good. So what is the status of the core document? Is there more that is needed, or do you believe
No, I think we're done, you know.
Okay, so I told Ori I'd pass him the documents.
Yes,
and I will
please.
say the area director will always have comments, and so you can expect to do another round for all of these.
Okay, yes, sure.
And then it'll go to IETF wide last call, and we'll get more comments. And then the entire ISG is going to review it.
Yep.
I recently authored a very short document where I promise you during IESG review, I changed every line in that document. So
Okay.
just be aware, you know, it can vary quite a bit, but you're not done yet. That's my point.
Okay, yeah.
But I do believe that we can work toward rechartering sometime soon. So, okay.
Fabulous.
Is there any questions from anybody about the core document at this point? All right, Claire, you want to share the next slide set?
Absolutely.
So just as a point of order, we are moving from the stuff that is in scope to the working group to the stuff that's pretty much next in scope, and I think everybody agrees, you know, has to be tackled next. We'll come back toward the end with a more complete set of things to think about ordering, but I think everybody agrees that stage 0 is really sort of next, as stage 0 as we've been calling it. So, all right, Thomas, go ahead.
Okay, so next slide. So a bunch of us have been, you know, meeting just privately, discussing some of this stage 0 problems. And what has happened was that people were not exactly talking past each other, but they were using different terminologies. And it occurred in one of the meetings that, you know, it's not even clear for us, for example, when a gateway does a lock on an asset in the network, like, what is it that the gateway is actually calling, right? And so this reminded me of this mantra in the IETF, you know, prevent layer violations. Well, we need to figure out our own layers, logical layers of the pieces, so that we can make sure that we don't do layer violations, and if we are calling down to a function at a lower level, we are conscious that we are calling down to layer. So anyway, next slide. So just a quick reminder. So this is A, B, and C in red, if you guys can see the red. So it's not clear, for example, how the app is going to talk to the gateway. That's line B. It's not clear how the gateway is going to invoke, do a lock on an asset on a ledger. That's line C. And it's not even clear what the application is going to do on line A. Some of this stuff will probably not be in purview of the IETF, like line A, an application talking to a ledger, maybe out of scope for SATP. But the C definitely, I think, should be part of the future of stage 0. And I want to show just one snippet of why this is confusing. So next slide, please, and we can go back to this. So this is the logical layers that seems to answer some of the requirements. So the application has a client app. In other words, it holds a private key. The gateway to do functions on the ledger also has a private key, right? So that's, we're not gonna just call it gateway app to make it simple, but it's a piece of software on the gateway that can talk to the network, talk to the ledger. So on the network itself, what are the constructs that sit there, right? So there's this wallet address, which is a public key. There is code there to do the lock, unlock, lock intent, if you want to talk about lock intent, mint, burn, rollback, and so on, right? And then there are specific pieces of code that are intended for the gateway, and we just call it gateway contract. And at the bottommost, we have abstracted up the consensus layer and just call it hosting. What that means is that the functions that are on that network is hosted by the bottommost layer. So value-bearing tokens, you guys know about that. We're using the term utility tokens to capture just data. If you want to dump data there, has no value, can't be moved, it's just there to be read, and other data which we don't know about. So this is not even a proposal. This is a sketch on a what is that, lunch napkin. So next slide to illustrate the problem. So, what is it? So we need a common layer model because we need clarity in the protocol design for stage 0. So we cannot be ambiguous, and certainly we have to be very clear. We want to prevent layer violations. We want to enable consistency, so that if a gateway operator has a product, a gateway, and it needs to be able to function across different ledgers, when it implements a lock, then logically it has to be the same, provide the same thing. If there's any variations, maybe you can enumerate, as you suggest. The lock could have lock type 1, lock type 2, lock type 3. It doesn't matter, but both gateways need to know which lock are you referring to, right? So we'll end up having to enumerate that. Okay, next slide, please. Here's an example. So this is very high level. So the idea here is that the client is driving the transfer. So the client app says, hey, I want to transfer this asset identified by asset ID. It's on network 1, N1 or NW1. Could you please create a transfer context from it? So it's asking the gateway to say, hey, look, I'm going to do a transfer. Can you do some preparation? And the gateway, bunch of lines in there between 1 and 2, does something, and then it returns a transfer context, right? And so now the client says to the network, okay, now I'm ready. I'm going to indicate, I'm going to bind to the network, right? So we don't have to go deep into this because this is future work. But what's really happening is that there's a lot of calls to different parts of that logical layer. So for example, in bind transfer context, this is a call to the piece of code that is part of the asset definition, part of the token on the ledger. Right? So this is an app layer thing calling down to the layer below it, an asset network thing, right? So previous to this, we were talking past each other in this diagram, like what's calling what. And so going forward, I think we will need to work some more on that logical layer so that everyone's very clear. And the question is like, where do we put this? Is it part of a terminologies document? Because we never actually, did we ever promise one? But we never had, we had a use case document, but not a comprehensive terminologies document. So this could be in there. But I thought I'd bring this up because, you know, there's awareness now that we need to know our layers. And so far in the past year and so on, we haven't really discussed sort of logical layering of the functions that the gateway is aware of. Next slide, please, Claire. I think that's it. Okay, next steps. Okay, maybe you write a 2-pager, 3-pager to describe this, and I don't know, maybe put this all together into a terminologies draft, a future draft, just so that when people read it, when we say, you know, lock intent, then it's clear to the reader what we mean.
Okay, are there any questions? I have a couple, but
yeah.
So going back, Claire, can you go to the first diagram? Yeah, well, that was fast. A couple of things from the IETF, you know, perspective. It's unclear to me whether A, B, or C are areas where you feel that standardization is necessary versus it's only going to be done in a proprietary, you know, network, and, you know, whether or not you need interoperability. And I could argue cases for each of those, but I want you to do that, not me.
Yes. So definitely for line C, there needs to be some form of, you know, interoperability standard, because if you're a gateway vendor, you're implementing a product, you don't want to have to, on your side, implement a different function for every different ledger out there, right? It's better to have a standard that has, you know, a good abstraction model, and say to the vendors, look, you know, you're using different verbs for your APIs and your SDKs, that's fine, but are you doing these things? Are you doing the same thing? And it helps the vendor themselves to clarify, because now I think, I mean, locking is a pretty common thing, and now I know at least 5 different vendors who are doing locking, and they're basically doing the same thing, just the SDK is calling it something different. So definitely for C, there's a role there, I think. So yeah.
Let me interrupt you there, because I want to talk about the locking mechanism.
Yeah.
You hit, you know, a question earlier around that for me. Going way back to the BOF, one of the things that I think I was talking about back then is you have these notions of requirements of an implementation, right? So if you implement a lock, it must mean these things, right? It must mean, you know, you promise that the asset will not be touched, it will not change, it will not change ownership, and that type of thing, versus now you're actually talking about how do we come up with a protocol where the gateway and the network can, you know, interoperate, or is, you know, maybe sees an API in some cases, and it could be a network in others. And I'll just pile on the questions, and I'll let you answer them all.
Yeah.
So the last one is, are you convinced that every network is significantly similar enough that you could get a common implementation and interface out of them?
So well, the last question first. Yes, I think so. Yes, that is in fact the problem. So back to the first question, I think the IETF could define the API signatures, like different versions. So if by lock you mean hash time lock, say so. If by locking you actually mean multisig, say so. Don't like use this abstract word like lock, because when you dive into the smart contract, you're really, this is a multisig. Why are you guys calling it hash lock or calling it lock? All right. So there's almost, I don't want to say there's almost intentional, you know, maybe it's just, you know, people just being too laissez-faire in defining specs. So part of our role could be that we define different API signatures and let the network figure out. So when we say lock, we actually mean lock. And if we mean hash lock, then we mean hash underscore lock. And so we just list that as different API signatures of what are the minimum payloads that the call would need to, you need to supply to the call.
Thanks, Thomas. Dennis, I can see.
Dennis.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hi, you hear me? Yes. So yeah, following on what Thomas said, definitely the interface between gateways and networks, as far as the semantics of the operations are concerned, are definitely something that we should probably define. And I agree with Thomas that definitely the networks that are out there can support such type of functions. I would say that having a pre-post conditions on the signature of the specifications might be something that could let people understand more accurately what we mean by every function. And there is also, that's concerning C. So I definitely agree that we need to have like a definition with signatures and pre-post conditions. In terms of B, there might be things that are not necessarily specs in terms of API calls, but maybe data structures like the transfer context, for example. So we could specify what is the context that should be transferred between the application and the gateway, and we could leave, like implementation specific on how these things could be transferred. But the semantics of the things that are conveyed in the transfer context should be definitely defined.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, so the line there, just first, I apologize. The line like on that diagram does not necessarily mean actual protocol. It could mean, a data structure that's understood by both, and it's, it's meaningful, like as Dennis was saying. So line B is actually, what is the transfer context JSON structure? What does it look like? Do we use JSON? Do you use JSON LD? Like, these are the questions that we, needs to be addressed so that a gateway implementer understands, well, here's the spec that the app, is utilizing. It's got this JSON structure. I'm going to implement that JSON structure for the transfer context.
Well, that gets back to, there's nobody else in line, so I'll jump in again. Oh, Peter, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, Thomas. This is Peter. It's a simple question. Like for the A and B, for that part, is there any current reference implementations that are existing already?
Not a reference. So different apps implement differently. There's people doing wallets that are calling directly to smart contracts. There are people having wallets calling to oracles that are calling to smart contracts, right? So we may not care about how they do it, but how the communication, the interaction happens. But we want to make sure that the transfer context, information in the blob, the transfer context, minimally is defined. So asset ID. I mean, you have to point to which asset you want to transfer, and therefore what context you want to create based on that asset, right? So what's an asset ID? Right. Yeah.
So if we can see some like real instance, what does it in the real application that they're doing? Can we see some real instance, and what are their current designs, or can we have some of those examples and then extract a common minimum?
Yes, I think when we get to the work stage 0, that's part of the role, is to actually pull up all these examples. I know at least a couple of examples that we can discuss, in the working group. But yeah, definitely. But we need to have sufficient examples so that we see commonality, yes, and therefore we can abstract up and say, you're basically doing the same thing. Let's call it this.
That's right. Yeah, that's just a comment. Thank you.
Any other questions online? Oh,
Yeah,
hey, Rama?
Rama's next in the queue. Yeah.
Thanks, Ted. I just wanted to respond to Peter's question. So there are reference implementations of all of these A, B, and C within Hyperledger Cacti. So if Peter can get in touch with me, I can point him to the code and also the applications. one of the major applications that was demonstrated was around CBDCs. So there was a use case that involved a couple of banks in Europe that were trying to trade assets between networks built on Fabric, Hyperledger Fabric, and Corda. And in one of my older presentations on use cases, I have the links there as well, but I can provide them to Peter if he email me separately.
Thanks, Rama. Dennis, do you have your hand up again?
Yes. Also replying to Peter, I mean, there is a draft that I'm also pasting now in the chat about the example, for example, on the transfer context. So these are things that work in progress, but it gives an indication on what potentially could be added in a structure that could be something that is interacting between the app and the gateway, capturing all this information about the transfer context.
Thanks, Dennis. Wes?
All right. So going back to, I think, my very opening question, between A, B, and C, do we have a notion yet, how these would be implemented? And the reason I ask is just for everybody's education. The IETF generally shies away from defining APIs at the, the C code kind of level. That is not always true. There are exceptions, and we can be one of those exceptions. Just be aware that we get a little more scrutiny of why that's needed. Sure. The examples are the DNS lookup API is very well defined. The Kerberos GSS API, right, is which I've had to use in the past, and have used it with multiple different Kerberos KDCs. So they do exist. We just have to justify why. Do you know which of these, are all three of those likely to be APIs, or is B possibly a REST protocol, or have you thought about that?
Yeah, so B is probably going to be a REST protocol plus a data structure, or two. For C and folks online, Dennis, if you guys want to jump in and correct me, please do. C is going to be at least a data structure, or a pseudocode that that needs to be implemented also on the network side. So it's a data structure, right? So this is part of the confusion why we had that diagram.
This is why I'm asking the question.
That's right. Yeah. So it's good that I'm saying I'm confused and we need some layers, because that's why I'm having difficulty answering.
Yeah, you guys don't have to answer it now, but at some point.
Yes. Yeah. We know we are lost, which is a good thing.
All right. What about A, which is the other one?
So A is another one, because there's different ways to interact with the network depending on the architecture. You could, as I said, you could have a piece of software on your smartphone that talks directly. You could have my phone is actually calling a server in the cloud somewhere that's talking to the network, right? So these are the things we need to take into account. But one of the data structures we need to figure out is the asset ID structure that may involve the asset network ID. So if I want to say asset ID, I mean this token on this ledger on this network, right? No ambiguity in the number. It has to be globally unique. So there's no, well, if you Peter's surprised. So if you append the local, block hash or something with a unique 32-byte number of the network, then there's no confusion, right? And this is why the draft that Weijia was doing is so important, because you can also include BIC numbers, big numbers for the banking guys, right? Because they want interoperability between traditional, systems with, future asset networks. But yeah, so we haven't talked about asset ID, and it feels to me it's a JSON structure that we need to define. It has to have these minimal fields. Yeah. So that's A.
Thanks, Thomas. Dennis, did you have something to add?
Yes. If we abstract a bit and we go back to the original intent of this group, it was to define the transfer protocol. So after some years now discussing about it, we find that there are additional artifacts that are related to the core of the protocol. Like, for example, which assets are we going to transfer, which networks we're going to use, and other things that gradually, are added as part of the bigger, the broader context of this transfer. So what we are trying now to put on the table is the fact that we would need probably additional components like registries where we can go and store these artifacts that are required for SATP. And together with the transfer context, we might contemplate things like being able to have universal IDs on assets. So we can even avoid things like double spending or having, assets that actually exist in parallel in different networks. So create global inconsistencies, because here's the first time that we are addressing a protocol that it's global. So it cut across all blockchains and everything. So inevitably we will have things that would be higher level than what we are now used to see. So first is the address of networks and assets, and the second would be which is B more or less, and A, because these things should be transferred between applications and networks and stay consistent. And on the other side, with C, we would need to define some precise semantics on the life cycle of the asset. For example, if I lock, if I burn, if I create an asset on the other side. So these are the kind of things that more point towards the fact that C could be an API-ish kind of interface there with methods that need to be precise and semantically well defined, whereas in A and B, primarily there may be data structures that are probably transferred.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Wes. Thanks,
well-
Dennis. Sorry, I'm looking.
I put myself back in the queue so I could let Dennis go ahead of me. So my final question, I think, but every time
Yes.
we go through this, I have to put another question. So given that A might be, for example, an actual protocol and data structure as opposed to an API, so it might actually be a network, that implies that the network itself has some sort of server listening for an application, so we end up with another gateway inside of the network to deal with the internal aspect.
So defining the limits where this group can go, should go, that's part of the stage 0 question. And that's a very good one. I asked the same question myself.
Well, the other question is there any reason that the application couldn't communicate to the network through the gateways so that A isn't necessary?
And we talked about that
Okay.
in the groups. So in fact, A is routed via B down to yes. Yeah,
Okay.
That's right.
Just making sure all these things are being thought about.
And this is when we start talking about this and that previous diagram, we all got lost. Like, what's a bind? What does bind mean? Who's asking whom for a context, transfer context, right? This is why we said, okay, everybody stop. Let's think about this logically in terms of functions and layers and where things sit in the logical layers.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of my questions. I've run out, but you guys did take off a huge ecosystem to try and define. So no shade at all, right?
Okay.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out where the working group needs to go next, because our area director, Ori, couldn't be here today. He had a conflict, but I told him we had it, and he doesn't need to worry, and that we'd send him documents soon. But he'll have some of these same questions when he bugs us. Okay, I'm done, Claire.
Brilliant, thank you. I did have a question. I was just waiting to see if there's any other hands. Well, less of a question, more of a comment. You mentioned about the asset ID and something we need to define. Are we still considering that assets may not be blockchain native?
Correct. So I've had conversations with people in banks, and they talk about liquidity or proofs of liquidity. Some of them might talk about proof of sufficient money in an account and so on. And so we have to take into account that the ID space, I think last time we said 32 bytes, there's enough room there to account for the bank ID, the BIC number, I think the routing number is the other way they call it, and then the actual account information. That portion, we can't force the banks to use it, but we can give them enough space in terms of byte space that definitely fits whatever numbering they have today. And I've had conversations about the BIC number with the banks, say, you know, because for example, if you want to transfer, you know, I would say US dollars. I have pound sterlings in my bank. I should say euros because we're in Europe. We have pound sterlings in my bank in London, and I want to move that onto a ledger, right? So we have to identify both sides precisely, and you know, we do, on both sides we just have to give enough space in the bytes that they can decide what to put there, right? And same on the ledger on the network side. I think 32 bytes is enough if you know, if I think it covers most of the ledger systems out there.
Thank you. And obviously, speaking purely without my chair hat on, my one area of consideration would be a balance between making the messages useful so that the SATP core has the information it needs to be successful without being so prescriptive that people don't build gateways because they're too difficult, or they're, you know, there's too many constraints to encourage competition in the marketplace, or even things like applications that already exist can't adopt them because it requires too heavy an adjustment to their existing application, their existing protocols. So there's obviously a fine line to tread. So something that I'm sure we might need to have longer conversations about.
For guys in the room who are not aware, so the big set of specs that the banking world uses at ISO is the ISO 222, and I think Claire is very familiar with that. And so I had a question once, you know, could you have a gateway where on one side there's an API that receives an ISO message, and then on the opposite side does something to the ledger, right? So this is a big, just one gateway, nothing fancy with the gates. This is one side this format, the other side a new tokenized format, for example. So it's not in scope, but this is the type of the topics I get in a question about when I say, well, we're defining a transfer protocol for gateways. So this is, so your gateways can speak old world and new world. That was kind of the, anyway.
Thank you. Peter, I can see you've got your hand up.
It's a clarifying question. So about the asset ID, we haven't finalized the design decisions, right?
No. So there's a draft. I think you have to search through the tracker because it dropped off our webpage. Working group page is not there anymore. This is wages draft, and I think I presented this in one of the interim meetings.
Quite a long time.
Oh, it's after 6 months we haven't touched it, we haven't updated it,
right.
And so it just dropped off the list. But it's there, it's still there in data tracker.
Okay.
So I can, you know what? I can dig it up and send it to the list again, or maybe even update
you can
it.
republish it.
Yeah, republish it because definitely it's needed. Wages super busy with other stuff, so it's gonna I promised I was gonna update it, so yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah,
and sorry, please.
Just a couple of quick notes about internet drafts, and if they're labeled draft dash somebody's name, not the working group, dash SATP, the web page for SATP will automatically pick it up. If it's not, if it's labeled something else, and some of the early drafts were SAT, not SATP.
Oh,
so Claire and I can go manually add those to the document list. So it could be that it's too old, but it could also be that it's not properly named. And it happens all the time.
So the text, if you can find it, the text is behind. So we have slides that we present at interim meeting that has more information, nice diagrams and so on that is not in the draft. My job is to transcribe the diagram into draft format, because there's actually byte counts
Right.
in the diagrams we've been working on. Yeah.
One other clarifying point, Peter. Nothing that they have done has been accepted by the working group yet.
So if you want to
So-
contribute, this is what.
The working group gets to decide what stuff looks like. So they can write all the drafts they want, no offense, but the working group has to decide this is the solution we want to work with, and then it'll change even after being adopted. So to be perfectly clear, nothing is set in stone yet.
You're looking for summer work, Peter? We can make you work writing drafts.
I have actually some questions. So the purpose of the asset ID is to be universally unique, right? At least.
When you add it to the network ID, yes.
Oh,
because you can always have hash collisions.
Yeah.
But having an append or prepend network ID that's unique, manually unique, you can't change. Right.
So the real question I'm having here, because there are many different designs of universally unique IDs.
Oh yes.
And
yes.
when we want to design another one, it just becomes another just another choice. So my thinking is that there's something already have been done in the W3C, like a decentralized identifier, just example,
yes.
and what are our relationship between existing those designs and our
there's even another one that you guys Wes probably knows it, the handle system. Bob it's an RFC where you have a prefix and you have what is it? It's not OI, DOI.
Yeah, it's the URI specification, but there's a bunch of their UN too.
Yeah.
So
that
actually
be used,
brings my comment. So Peter gave me a perfect leeway into, I've warned you guys in the past that a 32-byte field is unlikely to fly through IETF-wide last call.
Oh, you don't like 32 bytes? Okay.
Because it's not flexible enough. So one of the things in the IETF that we always look for is, how do you future-proof a protocol?
Okay, yes. TLV and CBOR, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
well,
yes.
so something like an identifier that says the rest of this is going to be 32 bytes. This is our common mechanism for existing distributed ledgers. But a bank may say, well, that's not what my stuff looks like, and I need a much longer, identifier, or, I don't need 32 bytes. There has to be something that encodes, this is how the rest of that field looks like, and you're going to have to expect there's going to be a network that needs 1,024 bytes, and you're going to hate storing it on your distributed ledger.
Okay. So this is, I remember, this is where Karsten stepped in, because I said TLVs, and he said, well, geez, that's really old-fashioned. It's like, why not use CBOR? At which point, I think I asked him, would you like to give a presentation about CBOR to the Secure Asset Trust Working Group? And he kind of said yes. So Peter, this is all future work, but this is exactly, I think, Wes, this is the third time he said this, that you need an extensible sort of, identifier scheme, because you don't know what's going to happen in 30 years. Right.
I don't mind saying it 4 times. It's okay.
Okay.
And are we in the AOB section?
No, I think, am I done? Yeah.
Get a little closer to the microphone.
Are we in the AOB section?
Not yet.
No, not yet. Okay.
We have wandered a little bit, but we'll come back to that.
I'm done, folks.
Okay. So the next section that we were actually going to do before AOB was to talk about priorities a little bit. Claire, can you pull up yeah, you're already ahead of it. So a couple of things. One, this is where we sort of exist today. I presented that slide. Go back one, Claire. I presented that slide a while back as to where we are. I think we are ready to submit it to the IESG, which really means giving it to Ori. We do need Shepherd reviews for all 3 posted to the data tracker, and Claire and I can make that happen. Peter's already written them, so we will upload it. There's one that I think somebody else needs to write, and I can do that. I mean, because you can't write one about your own document, but we'll take care of either finding somebody to do that or do it ourselves. Chairs do it all the time too. It'd be good for you to do, Claire, just thinking out loud. And then we'll get those submitted, and maybe we can actually get that done this week. And that's a huge success. I will say to this working group, People ask me how it's going. You guys, came in without a huge amount of knowledge of how the IETF works, and I've explained that you're doing an exemplary job. You meet on a regular basis. We have a lot of interim meetings. It's a non-trivial problem, and you've worked faster through it than many other working groups with very seasoned people, probably because you don't yell at each other as much as some of the other working groups. But so excellent job, everybody. And so that brings us to where do we go from here? So that's all, I think, what I just went through. All that still has to happen, but we are at a point where we can sort of begin to recharter and think about what's next. And I know there's been questions about rechartering. Go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah. So last time, back in March, we did some brainstorming live, and this is the list that I wrote up at the time. So we were taking suggestions of like what the most important things were that we should be working on. And I believe I actually put down stage 0, and then we actually added some enumerations underneath that, right? And I think it's fairly clear that there's been so much discussion about stage 0 that it really probably should be on the immediate next charter. But my question to the group, and this is, I'm not an expert, right? What else? So if we can't bite off on all 14 items, whether we agree it's all 14 are needed or not, subject to debate as well, what do we think is the ones that we should also be concentrating on next, based on the need of the people that are going to do implementations and deployment, based on how do we, actually implement this end to end to actually make a completely usable system? Certainly the original protocol wasn't designed to be, completely usable. It was the big components. Bill of lading and bidirectional transfers are things I think we wrote down very early on because they were discussed at the very beginning of the working group. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I want to hear opinions from others about, what you guys think are the critical ones. If you want to stand at the microphone and say, this is the one thing that I need, well, everybody put yourself in the queue. Yeah. So just as Dennis has done. Why don't we everybody pick 3, and I will try and write down. So we'll get a sort of a poll of what people think is critical.
Dennis, would you like to?
Yes. So if I eliminate all the things that actually could, stay for later, all the use case or implementation oriented or things that we can do with the protocol could stay behind. So that's my take would be stage 0, number 1, number 9, the registry to store all SATP related artifacts, and number 10 on the requirements for the implementation at network level on how we manage the assets.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thomas, would you like to come to the mic?
He's working on it.
So is it on?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, stage 0, yes, registry. So it's 1, 9, and either 6 or 7. I think it's going to be 7. Claire, I don't know if Luke is interested in doing 6, because they do have a paper that they thought they were going to make it to a draft. So they've been looking at 6. So, and I know Rama and I have talked about 7. So I'd do that. I'd do 1, 7, and 9.
Speaking on behalf of Luke, I know he's very, very interested in 6 becoming part of the next charter commercially, speaking to banks, looking at some of the projects that are out in the wild with the BIS. Exchanges is sort of top of the list. Interoperability for most consumers looks like an exchange rather than unidirectional.
Thank you.
But that's not with my chair hat on. Let's be very, very clear. That's on behalf of Luke.
I put Claire speaking on behalf of Luke.
Thank you so much.
David, go ahead.
Okay, I agree. Stage 1 for stage 0 is important, but I think 12 is important because we've been trying to put various security threats into our documents, but I think it feels like it's been kind of hit or miss, and I think someone who really who's worked with this kind of environment needs to put down on paper exactly what are the threats in this kind of a application. So maybe, and then we can nail down what the security threats are at each stage. And I would agree number 10 is also important.
Okay, thanks very much.
Peter, would you like to come up?
And we need as many opinions as we can get. So I'm looking at you, the rest of the audience.
This is Peter. Personally, 7 data sharing, and also I agree with the threat model. So if we have a more thorough threat model, and we can, analyze the attack vectors and to be more clear, then we can write some really nice operational considerations or security considerations drafts that helps us to really understand what are the wiggling security parts and what we should really care about when we're deploying them. So 12 is definitely definitely important. And for 7 data sharing, I think if we consider this as a we include this as part of the scope, we can attract a lot of the European projects that are actually, I know they are working on data sharing, and we can listen and discuss with them if they have some good experiences or good practice. Those are some very nice things to interop with each other. So I would say data sharing is a nice big scope to accommodate a lot of good work. So 1, 7, and 12.
Okay, thank you.
Rama, would you like to share?
Yeah, I made a note of my preference on the chat. So 1, it's obvious. 7 because 2 reasons. One, I'm kind of biased because I'm the primary author of both the drafts that talk about that, and they've been around for a few years now. Also, those drafts are inspired by real world, by our experience with real world use cases that we built a few years ago, and thanks to Peter for supporting the motivation there. I think it is something that's going to be quite useful. And though I would love to see 6, I would put it. I chose 14 just because it seems like discovery will be a good supplement to the asset transfer itself, rather than before even branching out into different application scenarios, use cases.
Okay, so I think we're out of the queue. Let me suggest one other thing, and this is especially really to everybody. We have a use cases. Claire, go ahead.
Just one from the chat. Hojan's son is asleep, so he's got 1, 9, and 11, and he's willing to participate in number 9.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Chat. We have a use cases document. It has a lot of use cases in it. It would be very interesting to go through each of those and then compare it to this list to say this use case requires these elements from that list. And so if somebody wants to do that analysis and post it to the mailing list, that would be incredibly useful, because it might actually highlight, just beyond the brainstorming here, there is a specific subset that looks like it becomes critical for those use cases to become real. Food for thought. Okay, anybody else that wants to talk to this list in one way or another? Clearly one wins, but we knew that was going to happen, and that's okay. It's interesting that there's another sort of a mix of another 3 or 4 that are, selected by, but the list is not huge, right? We actually, missed 13 as the terminology document. That'd be helpful, but it's probably not critical for the protocol, right? But, all right, with that, Claire, anything else you want to do on this sort of section. Otherwise, we could go to AOB.
I'm good for AOB.
Okay. Anybody have other things to discuss today? I was wondering, this actually might be the only meeting where we don't fill all the time. All right.
The projector's not showing all the pieces.
What pieces is it?
The yellow and the.
Oh, yeah.
The TV shows that the projector is not showing.
Oh, yeah. It's blank at the top because projectors are miserable at showing very dim lines sometimes. But all right. Last call. Otherwise, we're going to give back an hour, which, as I said, we've always run these meetings for a full 2 hours, so this will be unusual. That doesn't mean that we won't run full 2 hours next time. Peter, go ahead.
Just one thing. This is Peter. The Shepherd document, you have to send an email to the secretariat, right?
No, so actually, Claire and I will post it to the data tracker, so we
okay.
can do that.
Okay.
I mean, it can go to the secretariat too, but they'll do what we can do already. So the chairs have the ability to do that. So, we need to go dig it out. And in fact, Peter, if you wouldn't mind just resending it to us because it was a while ago, it would help us. But thank you.
Does it need to, just a quick question, does it need reviewing after the more recent changes that have been made to the documents?
Do you think there's any changes needed to the Shepherd write-up even after the changes to the documents? I mean, the questions are pretty basic, but.
Well, I think it's good for the working group level, and I'll just keep track of the discussions after a while, after we go out of the working group.
Okay. Good question, though, Claire. Thanks for asking that. Okay. Anything else? All right. So Claire and I will huddle with Ori about the list of future steps. And just for everybody's education, when we recharter, we will need to potentially change the scope and the things that we're going to concentrate on next, as well as the milestones. The milestones, like, we can just change, or I should say the deadlines for the milestones we can just change. When we change the charter, it does go to a review by the working group, and the IESG actually reviews it. And so it's not immediate. It has to be approved by Ori, and then there's a very interesting debate about another group and the charter being objected to by the IESG. So that happens, as well as the IAB will actually review the charter just for purposes too. So it's not an immediate turnaround, but it doesn't take too long. So, but Claire and I will work on what we think the next drafting of the charter is, and then we will post that to the mailing list so other people can review it too. So, okay. All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Claire.
Cheers, everyone.
See you in Montreal.
See you soon.
And we'll probably have, so actually that brings up a good question. Do we need another interim coming up soon? Probably for stage 0 more discussion. Okay, so maybe we'll shoot for an interim in
A few weeks.
Late September, early October, or something like that. So, okay.
Yeah, let's have a summer break.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.